Gear 6 finally appears. Yes, Gear 5 is not Luffy's final form, but stay calm and I will explain everything to you, because now we have Luffy Gear 6 against Imu. So, without further delay, let's go. The complete revelation of Rock's current state, already dominated by Imu's dark influence since the previous chapter, only reinforces the absurd scale that One Piece is taking right when Luffy's future power begins to be drawn. The battle between Roger, Garp, and the corrupted Rocks clearly showed that even with combined attacks from the two greatest monsters of that generation, even with absolute-level Conqueror's Haki, they still had difficulty penetrating the possessed being's defense, and this makes it obvious. If creatures dominated by Imu are so overwhelming, Imu itself demands something much more than Gear 5 from the protagonist. The ceiling has already been shown, and Luffy needs to break that barrier in an entirely new way. Elbaf has already delivered the clues. The door to Gear 6 was opened exactly when the giants began to speak about the destructive side of Nika. Not that playful spirit who dances, laughs, and distorts the world, but the aspect feared by children and respected by adults, the god who brings chaos and ruin when fully unleashed. Gear 5 represents only one face of the divinity: joy, laughter, and freedom. But in Elbaf, it became clear that there is a second buried side, a side that perfectly matches the type of enemy that Imu symbolizes. The truth is that Gear 5, with all the creativity it offers, still carries limitations that become exposed in prolonged battles. The form drains energy quickly, pushes Luffy's body to its limit, and cannot sustain full power against immortal-class adversaries. Even Kaido and Kizaru, who are far below the level of Imu and the Elders, already demanded monumental effort from Luffy. And now, with beings like Saturn exhibiting absurd resistance without even dying, the point is clear: Gear 5 is not enough. The God Valley arc itself reinforces this. If Roger and Garp, at their absolute peak, using Conqueror's Haki to the extreme, barely managed to scratch Rocks while he was only a receptacle for Imu's power, what does that say about the current Luffy? To reach that level and surpass it, he will need something he hasn't shown yet. And that is exactly where the idea of Gear 6 is born. Gear 6 would not just be a visually more serious transformation. It would represent the fusion between will and imagination at a level never before seen. The Nika fruit operates through imagination, while Conqueror's Haki represents pure will, the essence of the soul. When Luffy simultaneously masters both forces, without separation between playing and fighting, between laughing and destroying, he will touch the true essence of the god he represents. A being capable of facing the very pinnacle of global domination. Nika's destructive form, the same one the giants describe as chaotic and feared, perfectly fits as this next stage. Instead of turning the environment into a cartoon, Gear 6 could distort it in the opposite way, creating a field of freedom so intense that it would break spiritual barriers and destroy the corruption imposed by Imu. No white rubber and exaggerated laughter. It would be a state of absolute freedom, but with a much greater emotional price. And the most fascinating thing is that Gear the 6th of May bring a type of power the world has never seen: Luffy's ability to cancel Imu's mental and spiritual domination. If Saturn can control humans, if Imu can mold wills, then Luffy, being the liberator, would be exactly the opposite. He may come to free dominated allies, purify those who have been corrupted, and break the DOA reversi using his own soul as a catalyst. The surrounding environment can also react to Gear 6. If Gear 5 creates cartoon and joyful chaos, Gear 6 can transform the scenery into an extension of Luffy's absolute will, a zone of total liberation where allies grow stronger, morale increases, and Imu's influence simply does not prosper. It would be almost a counter-domain, the opposite of the manipulative darkness that Imu projects across the world. And all this connects with the many enemies Luffy still has ahead. It doesn't make sense for him to defeat the Elders, the Holy Knights, Blackbeard, Shanks, and then Imu using only the same arsenal. Gear 6 emerges as an inevitable evolution, a final layer that closes the protagonist's cycle as the heir of Joy Boy. And of course, this doesn't prevent Gear 6 from appearing sooner, perhaps even in a fight against Blackbeard, but all elements show that the true stage for this form will be the battle against Imu. The philosophical contrast also makes Gear 6 perfect. Imu is the symbol of domination, slavery, and silence. Luffy is the symbol of liberation, chaos, and voice. When these elements collided indirectly for the first time back in the past, we saw how devastating a mere receptacle of Imu's power is. So imagine Imu itself. This demands a corresponding ascent of the protagonist's light. Gear 6's behavior should also reflect this change. Luffy probably loses some of the childishness, gains a more focused, less playful posture, and a destructive impetus that corresponds to the seriousness of the threat. He doesn't stop being Luffy, but the divine facet takes control, the liberating warrior in his complete form. And this ties in perfectly with what we saw in God Valley. Two legendary giants uniting Conqueror's Haki to break the barrier of a being dominated by Imu. Now that responsibility falls on a single individual. Luffy will be forced to carry the weight that once required two legends at the same time. This alone justifies the absolute necessity of Gear 6. Furthermore, the final form may carry spiritual nuances, blows that affect Imu's soul, techniques that reverberate in the very will of the world, and an impact that does not depend on the body but on the essence. Luffy has always used his soul without realizing it. Now he will be able to use it consciously. Gear 6 is not just another upgrade, it is the final materialization of Luffy's role in the world, the supreme weapon against Imu, the form that confronts on equal footing the one who controls everything. And when that moment arrives, it will be the beginning of the battle that will change the world forever. Luffy awakening Gear 6 in Elbaf is not just probable, it is inevitable, given everything Oda has built so far, the stage, the enemies, the revelations about Imu, the history of the giants, the legacy of Joy Boy. Absolutely everything points to a transformation that will surpass any previous limit. From the moment Saturn and the Gorosei demonstrated regenerative, spiritual, and physical abilities that completely defy the laws of the world, it became clear that Gear 5, no matter how wonderful and creative it is simply not enough to defeat the untouchable sovereign of Marijois. And if there is a place destined to awaken a power of this magnitude, that place is undoubtedly Elbaf. Elbaf is not just the land of giants, it is the birthplace of ancient stories, the place where the legends about Nika were preserved, where the memory of the god of freedom was never erased. And now we know that the giants recognize two faces of Nika, the playful, joyful, and chaotic side, represented by Gear 5, and the destructive, feared side, revered as an entity that can bring ruin to the oppressors. This duality has never been explored, but Elbaf offers exactly the missing pieces for Luffy to access his deepest form. The pressure will also be gigantic, literally. Luffy will be surrounded by monsters like Imu, the Gorosei, possibly one of the countless holy knights and even legendary figures awakened from the shadows of the past. Imu is not an enemy to be faced with creativity and improvisation. Imu is the pinnacle of control, manipulation, and absolute spiritual power. The adversary demands something from Luffy that surpasses the very concept of Gear 5. Elbaf will carry this thematic weight, the country where Joy Boy originally failed, where his name echoes among the warriors, where the giant culture of freedom and celebration coexists with stories of divine destruction. And it will be in this context that Luffy will understand that his laughter is not enough, his joy is not enough, his imagination, however great, needs to be channeled with focus, with will, with purpose. This is exactly where Gear 6 is born. It will not be a simple evolution of strength. It will be the complete fusion of imagination plus will plus spirit, something that Gear 5 still doesn't master. While Gear 5 alters the world around with cartoon and freedom, Gear 6 can alter the enemy's very field of existence, directly confronting Imu's aura of domination. It is the form of the total liberator, the destructive Nika of those who imprison. And what will trigger this awakening? Despair, real danger, perhaps the fall of important allies, perhaps the mental domination of some giant, perhaps the revelation that Imu controls souls. Oda is clearly preparing something devastating. Luffy at that moment will be forced to break the limits of his own soul to free those who can no longer fight. This emotional shock has always been the trigger for Luffy's greatest evolutions. Gear 6 will also represent the moment when Luffy finally equates himself to the greatest monsters in the world. Joy Boy of the past, the original rocks, Roger with his absolute haki, and of course Imu. A battle of this scale cannot be balanced with the protagonist's current weapons. He needs to enter a stage where his will literally imposes freedom on the environment, crushing any trace of the enemy's manipulation. Elbaf is prepared for this kind of revelation. It is a land of gods, stories, and mythological powers. Its spiritual atmosphere is intense, connected with the very past of the D and the ancient wars against the monarchy of the shadows. Nothing is by chance. Luffy is going exactly to the place where his destiny is completed. And it is in this land that he will understand why the Nika fruit can never fall into the wrong hands. Because Gear 6 is not simply a power, it is the maximum potential for liberation. The form that can transform the entire world into a zone where no one can be subjugated, where Imu's will does not penetrate, where the light of freedom cuts the darkness of the empty throne. This awakening will occur at the height of the war, when Imu finally reveals itself as the being that has manipulated history for centuries. The fight will be so colossal that it will make Marineford seem like training, and Luffy, living his greatest moment, will break the invisible barrier between the human and the divine, reaching the level where the world itself reacts to his presence. Gear 6 will be the final manifestation of Joy Boy's essence. The moment when the title ceases to be an inheritance and becomes a conquest. The instant when laughter and destruction unite to free the entire planet. And when Luffy finally activates this power before Imu in Elbaf, it will be evident. That is the point where the protagonist becomes invincible not by physical strength, but by the strength of his soul, and the whole world will feel this awakening. And it will be precisely at this moment that all of Luffy's allies, giants, pirates, revolutionaries, and independent forces, will realize that they are facing something that is no longer just a pirate captain. Gear 6 will transform Luffy into a force of nature, a presence that makes even the most powerful tremble, just as Roger and Rox did in their eras. But unlike them, Luffy will not use this power to impose domination. He will use it to break chains, destroy systems, and free those who never had a voice. Imu, upon witnessing this evolution, will finally understand why the Joy Boy of the past was so feared. Because when the Liberator reaches his complete form, there is no darkness capable of containing him. The battle will transition from physical to spiritual, from blows to colliding wills, from destruction to the redefinition of the world. And in the heart of this confrontation, it will be visible that Gear 6 is not a form created to win, it is a form created to liberate. The war in Elbaf will be remembered not only as the greatest battle in history, but as the exact moment when the true enemy of humanity, the one who ruled from the shadows for centuries, encountered resistance for the first time. And it was right there, on the stage of the giants, that the greatest of them was born. Gear 6 will make Luffy the warrior the world waited for 800 years, the beginning of the end of Imu's era. And when everything ends, when the lights of war go out, the world will see that the awakening of Gear 6 was not just a step in Luffy's journey, it was the definitive turning point of destiny. The moment when freedom became inevitable, the moment when Nika returned completely, and the moment when Imu finally found someone capable of facing it on equal footing. And, in the end, when Gear 6 emerges in its maximum glory, and Luffy faces Imu with the absolute combined force of Nika and human will, it will be clear to the entire planet that we are witnessing the apex of the work. A moment so grandiose, so epic, and so laden with history that it will simply break the internet. It will truly be insane, the kind of event that turns chapters into legends and readers into witnesses of a new era. But comment on what you thought of all this and don't forget to like. Thank you very much for all your support and until next time.